Anthony, so much to do. We missed a week. That's my fault. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers who listen. We took the week to serve all the lovely ladies in the world and those who are most important to us. So we are back here, and it's great.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I was getting a little itchy, a little antsy. I was wondering when we were going to get back to talking about the puck. There's a lot of crazy, a little antsy.
See, Ant San, Antsy.
Oh, nice.
Come on, Antsy Philly. Whoa.
Yeah. Maybe we should change the my Twitter handle then, right?
Yeah, Antsy Philly on Twitter. That would be easier for me to remember. I won't screw it up, I promise.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a lot of good hockey going on, both at the professional and minor league level. But the NHL playoffs have been really good, as they usually are. That Nashville Winnipeg series was just lights out, 7 games, great hockey. I was mildly disappointed because I wanted to see Laviolette get back to the final again this year. But the Jets played a great series. I can't take anything away from them. Jets, by the way, loaded with American players. Did you know that? They have like 10 American players on the Winnipeg Jets.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, the last remaining Canadian team is the least Canadian team left in the tournament. And I love how Canada, every year, they all, like, the entire country, like, gets behind the last Canadian team left because they haven't won a Stanley Cup in 25 years in Canada. So they all root for like the other city, even though they could be their most bitter rival. I remember the year Ottawa went to the final against Anaheim. I think it was 2003. I had some friends in Toronto. Now, bitter rivals, Toronto and Ottawa. It'd be like Eagles fans rooting for the Cowboys in the Super Bowl. I mean, that's what it would be like. And the Toronto fans were like, "Oh yeah, well, we want Ottawa to win, so the Stanley Cup comes back to Canada." And I was like, Ottawa's full of European players. Like, why the heck do you care? Like, does it matter? Like, no, root for Anaheim. They got a bunch of Canadian players on the team. He's going to see good Canadian kids win, right? Anyway, so, but that series was fantastic, Nashville and Winnipeg. It was great to see Washington knock off Pittsburgh, as we talked about on this podcast 2 weeks ago. We saw
my bracket.
Well, it blew up your bracket, but I told you I saw it coming. The fact that the Flyers were able to win 2 games in Pittsburgh and not be nearly as good enough team to beat the Penguins told me all I needed to know about this Penguins team not quite being ready for a third Stanley Cup. And you saw it coming, and if Washington could just organize their game and play within themselves, they would be a better team than the Penguins, and they did. And then they carried it over to the first 2 games of the series against Tampa, and now all of a sudden they're back to being the old Capitals again. And I think they're done. I think they're toast. I think Tampa's got their number now. I think Tampa can win this series in 6. But geez, the Vegas Golden Knights, holy cow! An expansion team is 1 win away from reaching the Cup Final in its first season. That's unbelievable.
It's unprecedented. It's something that we'll get back to, I think, a little bit later in the show, because there's something that you and I disagree about. You think that it's the all-time biggest potential upset, like if they go on to win it, or I guess just getting to the final alone. And you dared off air to kind of compare this to a soccer thing that happened a few years ago in the EPL, and I simply will not stand by. You know, when you and Bob like to trash the beautiful game on Crossed Up on Tuesday mornings, you know, and
I'm going to the beautiful game tonight.
Hey, oh my God, it's happening. Who are they playing tonight? See, this is how much I've paid attention to the Union this season. I don't even know who they're playing tonight.
Real Salt Lake. That's the only reason I'm going. That's the only reason I'm going.
That's a bloodbath.
I have a coworker who's from Salt Lake, works in Washington, and was coming up, and it's like, "Hey, you think we can get tickets to this?" Like, he's all pumped and excited for it, and I'm like, "Sure."
Just so you know, Anthony, Real Salt Lake this season is 6th in the Western Conference, and they are very likely going to beat the Union. But you never know; weirder things have happened. So
can't wait.
Anyway, we'll get back to the Golden Knights and this historic run that they're on, which, by the way, the fact that they're being led by former Flyer and champion of my heart, not at all, I hated his guts, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, is pretty much all you need to know about hockey. They are like the most misfit toys team I've seen since the Halifax the Highlanders, the Halifax Highlanders. How did I screw that up?
Oh
my God!
Every one of your references from that movie is like fantastic. And
Halifax.
And you get that one wrong.
Man,
you might want to start saying it from now. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, Stanley Cup champion, just to kind of get used to it for when it happens. Right, that way you're preparing yourself for it.
It's kind of hard to like root against this Golden Knights team, right? I mean, I know that it's kind of the trendy thing because they're a new team and a lot of people have hopped on that bandwagon, but like that's an awesome story.
It's a great story.
We'll get back to that a little bit later in the show. That's what we call a tease in the industry that I know nothing about. So here we are. Why don't we talk about the AHL team that happens to feed a lot of good young players up to the Flyers who may or may not be played by the illustrious Coach of the Year Dave Hackstall, or they might ride the pine or sit up in the press box for the next 6 years. That of course is the Phantoms. And they are tonight, game 1 of the Eastern Conference Finals. A lot of stuff has happened in this playoff run, including a 94 save performance by Alex Lyon. There have been a couple major injuries. I would consider them major injuries that have happened to the defensive core, especially if you're looking to one or two of these guys coming up next year, in both Travis Sanheim and Sam Morin. A lot to talk about from that playoff run. So let's get into that and what you've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, and far be it from me, I'm not sitting down watching the games online because that's the only place up until now. Oh, actually, up until next Tuesday, I guess it is, that you can watch these games. So I'm not sitting down watching them, but I mean, I'm catching up and seeing how they're playing and seeing who's doing what. And they've done really well. I mean, they were the best team in the division all year long. So you kind of knew that they had a chance to make a little bit of a run here with this team, which is a nice mix. I will say this: you give the Phantom, Ron Hextall credit for this. Yeah, there are some nice young players on that team, but he does have a nice mix of veteran AHL guys as well. I mean, they're not making it as far as they've gotten without the likes of like a TJ Brennan on defense or Colin McDonald up front, as a forward who's been around forever, or Phil Verone. I mean, these guys are, they've all had their cups of coffee in the NHL, but are predominantly tweeners who play, mostly in the AHL, and that's why they're helping this team win. So it does take a little bit of that balance. Can't be all youth. But they've been getting really nice performances. I mean, Oskar Lindblom went down there. He's only played in 7 games, got a point per game, right? I mean, he's got 4 goals, 3 assists for the Phantoms in 7 playoff games.
What does that tell you? Before we move on to the next one, like I know that we talked about the fact that Lindblom, he was getting used to his first season in North America, getting used to a new league. It took him some time in the AHL. He played really well. He got called up to the NHL, and maybe it was a rough stretch there where he was trying to then adjust to the much higher speed and more physical play, perhaps, of the NHL, and greater expectations. To see him go back down, does this give you pause for a moment of whether or not he should be up next year, or is this just something where he's back playing with the team that he had built rapport with and is probably more comfortable with his role?
No, I think if anything else, it's this is a good sign, because I think what it takes, what you're seeing is Lindblom goes right back down there after being with the Flyers, and then was a healthy scratch for much of the end of the series there, and it just jumps right back into playing and is really good. You know what I'm saying? Like he's one of the best players on the ice, and so that shows you that I mean he's graduated beyond this. Okay, he is an NHL level player, and that's a good thing for the Flyers. I think the one thing that maybe the Flyers tried to do too soon with him is turn him into a top 6 forward. I know that they look long term and say we think he can be a second line left wing, and maybe he can be. But you look at a guy, and I don't want to compare him to Sean Couturier because they're 2 different positions. But Couturier took 6 seasons, right, to become what he became this year. He was a defensive-minded center who scored a little bit, but not a lot over his first 6 years of his career, and then all of a sudden breaks out this year at age 25. This was Lindblom's a kid who was a 5th-round draft pick as opposed to being a 1st-round draft pick, who comes into North American hockey for the first time and needs to kind of feel his way and figure it out, and maybe progresses a little bit faster than you thought, which is great. But I don't think you can just expect him to walk into the National Hockey League and be a top 6 forward. You just can't expect that. And that was where that's where they put him right away when he first got called up. And you could see that he's a good defensive forward. I mean, you could see a lot of the things that he does well, but he just doesn't know how to score at the NHL level just yet. So, like, I look at Oskar Lindblom and say, yeah, he belongs on this Flyers roster next year, but I'm perfectly fine with making him play a smaller role for now. I don't try and force him to be what you think he should eventually be. Let him play something else where he does well. He's a good defensive forward. Let him be a good defensive forward, okay? Let him play on that third line, against lesser competition. Or even, I wouldn't be opposed to him on the fourth line even. I know people will complain about it, but it wouldn't bother me as much. Let him play in situations where he's going to get better offensive zone draws or matching up against another team's third or fourth line as opposed to the top 2 lines, and see if he can build some offensive confidence off of that while remaining a solid defensive-minded player. So, that's what I see. That's what I think that these. Oh, there's the clock. That's what I.
The clock is back. Hold on, Anthony.
No. You enjoying this?
I am, yeah. There's just something oddly peaceful about it.
This is kind of tradition now. It's almost every episode we've had the clock.
Oh, yeah. I'm putting that in the program notes, by the way. People are gonna be like, "What the hell?" They're gonna like kind of go down this list. Oh man, Stanley Cup Playoffs thus far, Phantoms, Oskar Lindblom's play, Anthony's clock rings.
All right, there we go.
Do I call for whom the bell tolls? No, Anthony's clock. There we go. All right, we're good.
So anyway, so I think Lindblom. It's only been 7 games, and he's scoring a point a game. But you're seeing. He's playing in all situations too. I mean, he's got 2 power play goals, 1 shorthanded goal. So he's playing shorthanded. He's playing power play. He's playing even strength. He's just doing everything for them. He's been, in my mind, their best player through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. So that's a good positive sign for the Flyers. Another guy who I think has really looked good is Philip Myers defensively. He's got 5 points in 9 games, which is good for a defenseman. But he's playing the big minutes, okay? He's the guy that's out there playing against the top lines of the other AHL teams and really doing a fine job. I think that he's a guy, believe it or not, who might actually be ahead of Sam Morin to get a spot on this roster next year. And I know that seems weird because Sam Morin's out of he can't be sent back to the Phantoms without going through going through waivers next year. So you run the risk of losing him if he's not on the NHL roster. But I think that Myers has passed him, and I think you're seeing it and seeing why with the way he's playing in these playoffs for the Phantoms right now. He's like the guy that they are relying on for the big defensive minutes, and he's coming through. Playing really, really well. Now, Toronto will be a test because the Marlies are a really good team in the AHL. So it'll be fun to watch these games in the conference finals just to see how Myers matches up against some of their better players. But I really like the way he's played, and I think that that's another positive sign for the Flyers moving forward.
All right, so looking forward to next year for young guys that could get the call up. I don't know. Give us your top 3. If you had to rank them right now, your top 3 guys that were major contributors or are major contributors right now to the Phantoms on the defensive side. That I guess in terms of where their current level of play is, maybe not who's most likely to get the call up, but top 3 defensemen that you see right now.
Defensemen
is Myers at the top?
Defensemen?
Defenseman, yeah.
Just Well, Sanheim's, I think, still number 1.
Okay.
And he's hurt, but he has a knee injury. But I still think
sprain MCL, I think, right?
Yeah. So he's good to me. I think he's the guy who will be in the lineup no matter what. I think he's a guarantee. Okay. I think Myers is second. In all honesty, and I think he'll have a real chance to make this team next year as a top 6 defenseman. I really do. I think that he's got a real chance had a nice progressed. He progressed nicely for the Phantoms during the year, and now is playing at a top level in the playoffs. So I really think that's a possibility. I don't see Sam Morin really making this team. I think that there's a chance that he is either exposed to the waiver wire or the Flyers move him this summer as part of a trade.
That was where I was going to go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't. He's been a project, and they knew. I was in that draft room. Okay, I was working for the team when the year that they drafted Sam Morin, and I could tell you with 100% certainty that there was disagreement in the room leading up to not on the day of. On the day of, they knew they were drafting him day of. They had settled on it. Okay, but leading up to the draft day, there was concern about taking Morin where they were. There were other players that other guys liked, and they knew that if they made this pick, it was going to be a longer term project. That it wasn't going to be a hit right away. But they felt like that there was enough raw tools there that they could turn him into a top defenseman in the NHL. And there still might be, but he is so injury prone. He's had more problems with injuries since he's been drafted. Even when he was down in junior hockey, he had injury problems. And it really has gotten to the point now where you're 5 years since he's been drafted and he's barely had a cup of coffee in the NHL. He needs to be further along at this point. He's been passed by Sanheim, who was drafted after him. He was passed by Philip Myers, who was signed after him. I don't see a way to get Sam Morin into this lineup next year as a regular. I mean, maybe he sticks as the seventh defenseman, but is that really what you wanted out of your first-round pick? I don't think so. So I think that something's going to happen. I think that there's going to be a move made, and I think Sam Morin is going to be part of something. Whatever moves that Hextall tries to make this summer, I think Sam Morin's going to be part of it.
So here's one of the things that I guess I guess a lot of people have always been kind of enamored with is that he's this in Morin. He's a 6'7", 227-pound defenseman, and everybody makes it sound like he's this big hulking presence, which obviously he is. Like that is a big young man. But Philip Myers isn't that far off. I mean, he's 20 pounds lighter, but he's only 2 inches shorter. Like he's still a big defenseman, and it seems like Myers is a more skilled player. He's not as goonish, I guess. If you're the Flyers at this point, and like let's say that going into next season, you have to assume that Travis Sanheim has to be one of the top 6 defensemen on the big club, right? Has to be, assuming that he's recovered from injury. If we're building out the top 6, because I kind of want to circle back around to this. So if we're building out the top 6 for next year, without including any draft or like any kind of potential free agent or trade, our top 6 defensemen next year are who? We've got Goss. We have Gostisbehere, Provorov.
Right.
Do we slot Sanheim in as like a number 3?
Yeah, probably.
Is that too high for him?
No, I mean, I don't think he's a 3 yet. I mean, he's probably still more like a 5-6, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing in the second pair next year.
McDonald will probably be on that second pair, I would assume, right?
Yes. I mean, okay. That's fair as well.
All right, so we've got that pair. Gudis, I guess, is going to be back, right? He still has another year on that deal, right?
He's still under contract. Now, again, he's another guy who I think could be in play.
How many teams are really interested in him there?
Well, you can find teams who are kind of as part of that are looking at it as like we're rebuilding and we need to get a veteran guy to come in and just play for us every night, and they're closer to the salary floor than they are to towards the cap. And I think that you look at teams like that and you say, okay, well maybe they'll be willing to take a player. Maybe even if Hextall even offered to pay a small portion of the contract or something like that. I mean, because Gudis is signed for $3.35 next year. That's not a ton. I mean, it's probably what you're paying most of your number 4 defensemen in hockey. So it's not like it's not like a burdensome contract. But I think that he's a guy that could probably be. That there's a question, right? The guy you forgot to mention, who I believe will be on the roster, is Robert Haig. Okay. He's an RFA, but I think they'll certainly 100% offer him a contract and keep his services. So I think Haig is the guy that is probably in your third pair for sure. And then the question then becomes, are you keeping Gudas as your seventh defenseman, and then who's the other guy that makes it from the big club or from the minors, moves up, or do you go out and get a free agent? So I mean, there's some tweaking to do there. I mean, Hextall did talk at the end of the year, and he mentioned third line center and defense as a place that he wants to look to improve the team. So if he's going to go out and sign a defenseman, I think he's got to move a defenseman. You see what I'm saying? So because I think one of those guys, I think Philip Myers might be the one who has a better chance than Morin. One of those guys is going to be on the roster. So if you're going to go out and get another defenseman in free agency or trade or whatever, then you got to move somebody off that you currently have under contract. And the one that makes any sense at all is Radko Gudas.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to skip Haig. It just kind of felt like later in the season, he had kind of fallen out of favor at least a little bit with Hextall. Maybe that was me misreading it, but
well, it wasn't a misread by you, because this is where the Flyers frustrate me, because all they had to do was be honest. And if they were honest, people would have realized that Haig didn't necessarily fall out of favor. Haig had an injury and came back from the injury and was playing through. He had a heel injury. Okay, it was a foot/heel kind of problem, and he was really having a hard time skating on it. And as hockey players do, they will try and play through anything, and they try to bring him back a little bit early. And he played a few games, and then they had to take him back out because you could see him, you could watch him playing. Like, this guy's not playing right. Something's wrong, and they took him back out of the lineup. And that's when they reinserted Sanheim back in. And that was right at the end of the season, and they just kind of rolled with it into the playoffs, right? And then Haig got in once they were down 3-1 to Pittsburgh. He came back, and they at the very end. But he was injured, and all the Flyers had to do was say, yeah, he's not 100%. You say that, you don't have to say what the injury is. Just say, listen, he's not 100%. And no one's questioning, well, why is this decision being made? Why is that? But the fact that they keep everything so close to the vest, now all of a sudden you start saying, it makes perfect sense for you as someone who's watching from afar, say, well, maybe Hextall doesn't have confidence in Haig anymore. And that's a very fair question. Maybe that's for you to ask in your situation. You're not off by asking that question. The fact of the matter is that he was not 100%, and he was trying to play through it. So that's why I think that they would be better off being a little bit more forthcoming with some of this stuff, so that people don't start getting, making assumptions in that situation.
All right. So it sounds like, I guess the possibility is there for Phil Myers. Like, there is a path.
Yes.
Now, do you think that next year, I guess at the end of the season, Hextall kind of went into it considering Ghost and Provy to be veterans now. They have now been promoted to veteran players. Well, they're no longer young players in his mind. Where in the past,
it'll be Ghost's fourth year next year, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
but I mean,
you aren't a rookie anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going into the last season, I don't remember if he referred to Ghost as a veteran or if he still considered him a young guy. Well, like when the questions were coming up about why they wouldn't go with a Sanheim, like why he wouldn't be guaranteed a spot in the top six. That was, the constant argument was, well, you can only have so many young guys on the defensive side. So after the season ended, Hextall, I think was his end of season press conference, one of the things that he kind of talked about was, Ghost and Provy being, vets on this team, which now means that I would think that kind of leaves the possibility open. It leaves the door open that, Sanheim is by no means a vet, but he spent a year with the team, or a good chunk of the year with the team. That to me kind of said, and I guess Haig as well. Like, Haig now has some pro time. They're certainly not seasoned, grizzled vets. They're not a Radko Gudas. They're also not going to throw out, a stupid hip check or get themselves suspended. But I guess the possibility is there for Phil Myers. It does make me feel a little bit bad for Sam Morin. I mean, he's kind of like the Anthony Stolars of the defense. He just can't stay healthy. Right. And that to me is kind of a shame. But in some way, I kind of look at it, and if I'm thinking that Sam Morin can't really benefit from spending more time in the minors, like if we say that hypothetically he's spent so much time down there that he's not going to develop that much more as a player, I have no problem with him being the seventh defenseman. I mean, like, is he really going to kill you night in, night out if he comes in and gives Gudas a night off, or whoever ends up being like the sixth defenseman on this team, like, is Sam Morin that much worse than Brandon Manning? Like, is he? Maybe, I don't know. Maybe he is. I mean, they're obviously stylistically totally different players, but like, to have a large guy that can go in and throw a body from time to time, if you put him on a pairing with somebody who at least, is able to cover up some of his deficiencies, like, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world. And if that's what you get out of a former first round pick, like, it's a shame, and it's certainly not what they had hoped to get. But I mean, you kind of have to cut your losses, I would think, at some point, right? He can't just sit in the AHL for 2 or 3 more years while you cross your fingers that he's going to develop.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I don't think he can. I think you're right, because, I mean, like I said, he can't go back down. He's got to clear waivers to go back down. And I guarantee you there's another team in the NHL who would not let him go by on the waiver wire. Just because you're going to sit there and say, well, geez, here's a 22, 23-year-old kid who, hasn't really gotten a chance in Philly, and they're going to put him on waivers, and he was a former first-round pick. Hell, we'll take him. We'll give it a shot, right? You claim the guy and throw him in there. If you're especially if you're a team that you don't think that you're kind of rebuilding and trying to start over again, that's an opportunity. So that's why I don't think that the Flyers are going to let it get to that point. He's either they look at it and say we're going to let him give it a shot at the NHL level, which I don't think they will, but maybe they do that, or they move him. I think those are the two options, more so than, oh, let's cross our fingers that he makes it through waivers, because he won't. He won't make it through waivers. So that's why I'm of the belief that he's not going to be here. And not to mention, I think the Flyers have another defenseman who not a lot of people really talk a lot about, who is kind of, I don't want to say he's on the come, because he's not quite there, but who they look at and say, we think this guy could eventually be an NHL guy, and that's Mark Friedman. He was a third-round pick a couple years ago. He actually had a really good camp with them last year, and there was some internal discussion about the potential of him maybe possibly being a guy that they looked at this year. Not out of camp, not winning a job out of camp, but maybe being a call-up at some point during the season. He didn't have as good an offensive season with the Phantoms as I think that the team had hoped. But I think that they still look at him and say, I mean, he's playing all the time, every game. He's not coming out of the Phantoms lineup. I still they look at him and say, yeah, there's a guy who maybe could become that seventh defenseman who's not going to be a star player, at the NHL level. We drafted him in the 3rd round, right? So we think he's a borderline NHL kind of guy. Hopefully we hit a lottery ticket and become something bigger. But if not, that's kind of where your third round picks end up becoming your bottom 6 forwards, your bottom 2 defensemen. I think that there's a guy there who they look at and say, well, we could always rely on him in that capacity. So there's even another defenseman like behind him. So I don't know. I just don't see it. I just don't see where Sam Morin fits. And as a result, I think that that's going to be something when we're talking about Hextall making moves this offseason. I think one of the things that he's going to do is try and use Morin as his quote-unquote prospect to move to get another player, to get a better pick, or whatever the case might be. I think that's the way he's going to end up playing this out.
So let's talk about that. So going into the draft, the Flyers have the 14th and 19th picks. Yeah. You've said before that you think that there is a decent chance that they try to make a move up.
Yeah.
And in the past, we've also talked about the possibility of trading like a Wayne Simmons. He's got 1 year left on his deal, correct?
One year left, $3.975
So if you're looking at the most valuable assets that the Flyers have right now that you think that they're willing to part with, we've got that 14th pick, the 19th pick. We're assuming Sam Morin, even in some way, can be viewed as a potential, decent trade piece, I would think. And then a proven vet in Wayne Simmons, whose cap number isn't astronomical this year, and then maybe Radko Gudas, right? Or would we say that those are the top 5 potential trade pieces that you could see potentially moved at or around the draft?
I also think that they have a little bit of a goalie conundrum that they got to figure out as well. And I think you might see them try and move 1 or 2 of the goalies, because I think what you're looking at is, I'm not certain that they're going to come back with both Elliott and Neuver next year. They're both under contract. I think that something needs to change in that capacity. and maybe like you had mentioned very briefly earlier in the show, maybe Alex Lyon now deserves an opportunity to compete for the backup goalie job at the NHL level. He's really proving himself yet again in the playoffs for the Phantoms. He's 6-1 in the playoffs and .959 save percentage, 149 goals against. I mean, what more can you ask from the guy? 94 save game and 5 overtime game. I think he's a guy that you sit there and say, well, you know what? We like that a lot more than we like the fact that we have to deal with these two veteran guys who were, injury prone on our roster for a whole year. Now, is Alex Lyon ever going to become a star NHL goalie? Probably not. But could he become a, legitimate number 2 guy on a team? Yeah, for sure. So you have him, and then you have Stolarz, who missed almost the entire year with his knee injury. So where does he slot in? I know they kind of thought of him as a backup, NHL backup kind of guy. And Carter Hart's going to be on the Phantoms next year because he's graduating from the WHL. He's actually going to probably join them just for practice purposes now. I doubt he'll see any time here in the playoffs, but at the same time, I think he's going to be there and join the team. So he's going to be on the Phantoms, and no doubt about it, he's going to be the number 1 guy on the Phantoms next year.
Wait, is he? He's not eligible for the playoffs now.
Because his team got eliminated from the.
Is there any chance? Like, could we actually see? Would it take an Alex Lyon injury?
They won't put him in at this point because the goal now is to win the Calder Cup. The goal is now not to see if a guy can play at this level, right? So if this was the regular season or earlier in the playoffs, the very beginning of the playoffs, like if Carter Hart's team didn't do really well at all and their junior season ended early, yeah, okay. I mean, I think that there would be a possibility. I think a skater has more of a possibility. Like Morgan Frost is another guy who I think you're going to see on the Phantoms. I don't think he's going to play either, but I think there's a better chance that you see a Morgan Frost than you do Carter Hart, because Morgan Frost is a forward. There's 12 forwards. You can kind of, figure out where, the right opportune times to use him. He can only, maybe only play him 6-7 minutes, but you put him out there in the right situations. You're not going to throw a 19-year-old goalie into the middle of the conference finals, after never playing pro ever. It's just not going to happen. That's kind of crazy. So I don't.
So you're saying there's a chance? All right, we're good. Cool. I'm going to buy my Carter Hart.
Right.
Lehigh Valley Phantoms jersey.
But you see what my point is, right? So they have a little bit of have a little bit of a goalie conundrum for next year. So I think that at least one of those guys, if not two, could also. I mean, you could look at maybe Neuver as a possibility to be moved, or Stolarz as a possibility to be moved. So I think there's a couple of guys there as well that you can throw into that mix with the other 5 that you mentioned as potential pieces that Hextall could use to try and improve the team by sending them elsewhere.
So, to get back to Carter Hart for a second. So if we're
you're in love already, Russ. No, I know but you are.
No, systematically, because I didn't play this game. I'm too much of a weenie. We know this. And also, we didn't have ice in Schuylkill County unless it was the winter, whatever. If I'm a young player, right? What's the easier thing to fill in at? Like, systematically, if you're a goaltender, does it take that much to get adjusted to a new team? I mean, like, I guess you have to know where to expect your defensemen and like where the defensive scheme, like the setup and everything is going to be, and like building chemistry there. But like, is it really that much harder for a goaltender to acclimate themselves to a new surrounding than it would be for a forward?
Probably not. It's more of a communication issue with goalies, I think, than anything else, because you have to know what the system is, right, and how your defensemen are going to come back into the zone, and how your forward's going to come back, and who to leave the puck for, and who you throw the puck up the boards to, and stuff like that. I mean, there's all kinds of communication things. So, but that can be figured out relatively quickly. I don't think that's something that's really a thing that you sit there and say, oh, it needs time for adjustment. I don't think it needs a long time for adjustment there. I think what it is for a goalie is more so you've played junior hockey. You've never played against men. And now all of a sudden you're going to come into the playoffs against men and play. I think the stage is big, and I think that's the issue. I think you need to learn how to play on that stage before you go out there. I mean, imagine being someone who, I'm going to make a musical reference here. Imagine being somebody who plays in a high school band, right? And
I've been there.
You're pretty good.
All right, I'm good. We're good so far.
Yeah, you're pretty good, right? You're a pretty good guitarist or whatever. You know, and okay, you guys do some good covers and stuff. All right, that's kind of cool. Your friends like you. You know, maybe they come see you at the coffee house or whatever. You know, 20 people come see you, including mom, dad, and grandpop and grandmom, and if, you know, some of your closest friends. Like, oh, that's cool. That's awesome, right? And then all of a sudden, you're asked to go perform at the Wells Fargo Center in front of 18,000 people. Are you ready for that? You ready to take that step? No, you're not. I mean, there's something that has to happen in between. You have to kind of prepare yourself and get yourself ready for it. You don't just get thrown into that, because that's basically what this is. And you can't just expect to go up there and just, you know, pull out the axe and start wowing the crowd. You have to build that. It's got to be built in, and you can't just go in and do it. Now, I will say this. Let's go back to 2005. I'm going to make a point to defend what I think you're about to say.
Okay.
I'll take you back to 2005. Mm-hmm. The Phantoms in the playoffs, they brought in right from junior hockey, Jeff Carter, Mike Richards, and they had never played pro before. They came right in, were put into top line roles, and expected to do a lot, and led that team to a Calder Cup championship. So you sit there and say, well, if they did it then, why can't they do it now? The difference was there was no NHL that year, so it was a different league. It was a different situation. Like, you wanted to – these guys were going to make they knew Jeff Carter and Mike Richards were going to be on the Flyers team in 05-06. Not going to be just going to be on the Phantom. They were going to be on the Flyers. And they said, you know what? We got to put them in there and see how they perform in this situation, because they're going to be in the NHL next year. That's a different story. Carter Hart's not going to be in the NHL next year. If there was a belief that he was going to be in the NHL next year, then I could see it happening. But he's not. He's going to be on the Phantoms for almost a full year. That's what's going to happen. And so that's why you're not going to see him get thrown in right now.
So what I was going to say was to your point about, you know, being a high school band kid, right? You're out playing in your garage, you play the coffee house, fine. And then, like, you're dropped in Wells Fargo Center. Okay, well, I'm going to say that there's a little bit of a false equivalency to what you're saying. And this is why. You at no point get to represent your country in a juniors competition. And Carter Hart has done that multiple times now. Did they win the gold medal this last time around, right? With Carter Hart in goal? Yeah?
Yes.
Then the Canadian team won the World Juniors. So I think, you know, that's playing on a bigger stage. Again, like, I get that it's not, you know, playing in the same kind of professional setup that the AHL is, but I would go out on a limb here and say that it's certainly a higher level than maybe what he was doing in the WHL.
Correct.
It's an entirely different beast. It's certainly not like he's being thrown into, you know, an NHL locker room and having to play at Wells Fargo Center. Like,
that's where I'll disagree with you, though. It's not an entirely different beast, because you're still playing against 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. That's all you're playing against.
Yeah, but you also have the pressure on you of wearing the Canadian crest and and everything that goes with it. So you have the, you know, it's not the same as playing in the Olympics representing the national team, but you still do have, like, national scrutiny coming not only from Canada, but also from, you know, your parent club and all of their fans who were, you know, watching this tournament kind of at a glance, but especially focusing in on you. So I don't know.
No question. But here's what I always try and tell people, because you say, well, it's a young man's game and blah, blah, blah. I say this, and I say it repeatedly, and I will say it, and I say it until I'm wrong. When you're a teenager, how many teenagers are able to come into a professional sport and succeed immediately? That you have to be incredibly special. You have to be one of the elite of all elites to be able to do that. Because it's just it's different playing against people who are 10 years older than you. It just is. You're physically, your body's not ready. You're not as strong. You're not as fast. You're not at your peak physical performance. And so that's what it is. And yeah, of course, we all want to see Carter Hart play. We all want to see him in these pressure situations. We would love to see him play. Oh yeah, let's throw him in there and see how he would do. It's the conference finals. Maybe he can steal a couple games and lead him to the Calder Cup championship. That would be great. Yeah, that'd be
You're darn
awesome,
right. You're darn right, Anthony. See,
it would be an awesome story. Yep. It would be an awesome story.
Don't you throw the butt in here.
But he's 19.
Through the butt.
He's 19. He's not grown into his body yet. He's not what he's going to be in 3-4 years. That's the difference. And it's something that we fail to think about when we get excited about young players at any sport, not just hockey, but when we get excited. Now, football's the one exception because college is kind of the feeder, right? And even NBA to some degree. I mean, yeah, there's the G League, right? But even to some degree, they have it where you can go right from college to the pros. You don't see it in baseball and you don't see it in hockey because they have a development program for kids to get there, right? And kids more often than not in the NFL that are entering from college, entering the NFL, are already 22 years old. Some are even a year older than that. Sometimes they're 23 coming out of college. So they're already that much older. And that's why it's a lot of times you hear about, you see college kids who sign in the NHL after the end of their college season, and they get an opportunity in the NHL right away. And you're like, well, geez, these guys weren't even drafted or were, and were like third-round picks, and all of a sudden they're playing in the NHL. And these junior kids, you can't get them up there. The difference is the age. They're 4 years older. They're 5 years older. It's a big physical difference in a sport that requires that kind of physicality and speed. And it's something that we just don't think about.
All right. Well,
sorry. Sorry to be the
Debbie Downer there, but when you throw out the possibility of seeing the kid, like, I'm going to be excited. I mean, now if you're telling me that potentially we can see Morgan Frost, like, I'm fine with that as well. I mean,
I don't think it's going to happen either. But there's potential.
But if there's potential, I'll get excited for it. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm just happy to see that Lindblom's playing, and it'll be fun to watch some of these other young guys that potentially
I'll give you two more.
Club. Go ahead.
I'll give you two more names to just watch here the rest of the playoffs. Well, actually, they maybe not the rest of the playoffs because they're also dealing with some injuries as well, whether they get back or not. But Michael Vorobiev, I think, is a guy who could be a fourth-line center kind of guy. I like him better than Mike Vecchione. Vecchione's playing the whole time, but I think Vecchione's going to be an AHL-only guy, in all honesty. I like Vorobiev a little bit better. And I really like Nick Aube-Kubel. He's played in 6 of the games so far. I really think he's another guy who I think has a shot at a fourth-line role on the Flyers next year. So those are a couple names if you happen to catch the Phams, who, by the way, are getting 3 of their games against the Toronto Marlies put on NBC Sports Philadelphia.
Yeah, NBC Philly. Look at you. NBC Sports Network Philadelphia. Don't you dare call them NBCSN Philly unless it's on social media, and then apparently that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Oh. It's nothing like glomming onto the team, in their potentially their final postseason appearance, right? In their last series. Better late than never.
This is so classic them. They did this in 2005 too, when the Phantoms made the run to the Calder Cup Championship. All year they didn't even know that they existed. No talk about them. There was no highlights. Nothing. And then all of a sudden they get to the conference finals, and it's like, oh, there's a minor league hockey team in the viewing area. Because here's the difference: like when the Phantoms were up in New York, up playing in Glen Head, New York. Fine, okay, whatever. They're far away. They're not in the viewing area. You want to mention that something happened that they won or lost? Okay, fine. But Lehigh Valley, Comcast is in the Lehigh Valley. I mean, it's an hour away. I mean, this is our market. Put them on, for God's sake, from time to time, rather than put on an infomercial. I don't care if you put the game on tape delay. People will watch it rather than throw on some kind of anything.
Yeah, even the Plus network. That's by virtue of them having NBCSN Philadelphia Plus, like
put it on.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
How hard can it be? And you know what? I understand. Oh well, we got to put a crew together. Blah blah blah. Seriously, put one freaking camera up there in the stadium. Simulcast their radio guy as your play-by-play. I mean, he's a team employee, right? I mean, just put him on. You don't have to pay for an announcer or anything like that, or whatever. If you want to try somebody out as an announcer, say, "Oh, let's see how this guy sounds doing a game." Whatever. I mean, that's what ESPN does. They just throw random people onto random assignments. I mean, literally, I was watching. I nearly fell off my chair the other day when they have they have whatchamacallit competition now on ESPN. I don't know. Did you see this where they have
the beanbag, like
beanbag
cornhole?
Cornhole.
Yeah, they had cornhole on TV.
Cornhole championships, and all of a sudden, walking in there to do the interviews, the sideline reporter is a girl named Danielle Maslany, who was my intern at the Flyers.
Whoa!
She was my personal intern at the Flyers. She was the sideline reporter for ESPN for cornhole, and I'm like, seriously? They'll do it. They'll try anybody anywhere. I mean, that's what they do. And, you know, it's like, oh, good for Danielle. Good for Danielle. I'm proud of her. She's doing really well for herself, trying to make it in the business, is working for ESPN. That's great for her. But I'm sitting there like, seriously? But so, I mean, how hard would this be on the local level? This is a team that's an hour away, and they're pretty darn good. And this is a good hockey market. Why do you jump in last minute? 2005, honest to God, Tim Panaccio was, I think it was his second year at the time it was Comcast Sportsnet. He was at the opening 2 games of the Phantom season, which took place on the road. So it was in, first game was in Hartford, Connecticut against the Hartford Wolfpack, and the second game was in Bridgeport, Connecticut against the Bridgeport Sound Tigers. Tim Panaccio did not return until they played the Providence Bruins in the Eastern Conference Finals in May. And there was no season. There was no NHL season. So he didn't have to do anything other than cover the stupid lockout, which was the same thing all year long, right? He did nothing, but that's when they decided to send him out. And that's when they decided to start airing games. They didn't show any games at the time in the conference finals. They just had Tim covering it. And then in the final, when they played the Chicago Wolves, all of a sudden, all those games were on TV. And so you guys are missing an opportunity here.
Well, you know, if the Lehigh Valley Phantoms are listening, if the front office or whoever's listening, you know, we will gladly call the games. We'll do Snow the Goalie covers the Lehigh Valley Phantoms. It'd be great. We'll do play-by-play, some color commentary. It'll be awesome.
No,
I could be like, what was the character in the SNL skit? Crap, what was the guy's name? He did the, was it Chance the Rapper? It was Chance the Rapper,
yeah.
I think. Where he's down there and he's like, man, it is cold down here. It is cold. Like they say in hockey, let's do that hockey. Like that, I'll do that. I'll stand down by the ice and complain about how cold it is. You can do double duty on the call. It'll be awesome.
You know, I did that. The second lockout, 2012-13 season, the Flyers had to justify us remaining as employees because there was no games, right? The season didn't start till January. So we had 4 months where like we were just there. So they had to justify us as employees. So what they did is they sent me and Tim Saunders because the radio people are team employees. The TV people are Comcast employees or NBC employees, as it were. So they sent Tim Saunders and I to New York, and we called Phantoms games. I was the color analyst. Tim Saunders was play-by-play, and we did Phantoms games through the website. Like it wasn't televised or radio. It was only done through PhiladelphiaFlyers.com.
So who's calling these games for NBCSN?
That's a good question. I didn't. You know what? Let me see if
Snow the Goalie. It's time for Snow the Goalie.
I know. Let me find more.
We're going to be on TV, Anthony. It's going to be great.
Let me find her.
Would they get Jim Jackson up for that?
Hold on. She sent an email. Hold on.
Who's she?
Maureen Quilter.
Like I'm supposed to know that
from NBC Sports.
All right, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Maureen, how are you, Maureen?
She's like
she's listening.
NBC. Yeah, she does the. Hold on. What email address did I get this to? Damn it! So
this is good pod.
This is good. This is good radio right here. This is good sound right here. Right.
Takes me back to the good old days of. I got nothing. How am I going to fill some time? Let's fill some time. I could edit this out, but that's not as fun. We're getting real-time updates here from Anthony SanFilippo, pulling up. How many email addresses do you have?
4, I think.
What?
I do, yeah, 4. 3 Gmails and a...
tell me there's a Hotmail or an old AOL.
You know what? I probably still have, and I don't even remember how to log into it, but I had an Earthlink email address many years ago.
Oh, baby. Earthlink. I had Earthlink. Right? Oh, what was the one that was before Earthlink? I gotta look this up.
Before Earthlink?
Yeah, there was a company that Earthlink bought that was a dial-up. I'm gonna look it up. Earthlink completes merger with Windstream. No, I never had Windstream. Do you know Earthlink is still in business?
No way, really?
It is. Yeah. Earthlink and Windstream merged in 2017. That's a real thing. It's an
interesting.
That's real life. Wow.
It doesn't say in the press release. It just
all right.
says,
So we don't know who's calling the game. So we're going to assume that it is open season for throwing an application. So Snow the Goalie officially submits a formal application to call some Lehigh Valley Phantoms games. Really bring the entertainment that people maybe don't deserve, but exactly the kind of coverage they need. Obviously Anthony's very qualified for this. I'll throw my hat in the ring here. I am currently 7th in the Snow the Goalie bracket challenge, so that's a thing. I've now capped out at as many points as I can have. I had Pittsburgh winning the cup, so.
So all it says is that they're going to air it. It just doesn't say who's calling it. It can't be Jim Jackson because Jim Jackson's now with the Phillies. He's got Phillies responsibilities, right? So it could be. I mean, I can't imagine Bundy's going to go up there for 4 days. He hated traveling. That was one of the things he didn't want to go up to New York. I mean, that was why I ended up being the color guy because Bundy was like, I ain't going. He didn't want to do it for the Phantoms back then as the radio color analyst. Maybe they get Coatsy to go up there.
That'd be awesome.
And or Bill Clement, but I don't know who's going to do. Maybe Saunders does play-by-play. Who knows? But it's not they didn't announce it. That's crazy.
All right, so that'll be a ton of fun. Real quick before we head out, though, I think to kind of put a bow on the Golden Knights. And let's have our brief throwdown here. Tell the people why you I don't know. You said that it's the most improbable thing you've ever seen.
This is the most improbable professional sports thing. If they'd win the Stanley Cup. Obviously, if they don't win the Stanley Cup, it's not that improbable. But it would be the most improbable professional sports outcome ever if the Vegas Golden Knights win the Stanley Cup in their first season.
So it's just flat out wrong. And while I respect you and I respect your opinions, you are so wrong on this. It's painful. And I know that you and Bob don't like to give soccer any kind of credit, but before the season, the longest odds for the Golden Knights to win the Stanley Cup were 500-1 odds.
Okay.
And 500-1 is a lot. Like, that's obviously a massive thing to overcome, right? I think the Pittsburgh Penguins had 9-1 bets or something like that, 350 9-1 bets that they were going to win. At one point, there was some other team that had like a rougher odds, I think, than the Golden Knights. But yeah, 500-1.
Can't imagine that's the case.
If you think that was the most improbable thing in professional sports, let me reintroduce the people to Leicester City of the English Premier League. In 2016, they faced odds of 5,000-1 in the preseason. 5,000-1. 10 times worse odds than the Vegas Golden Knights did of winning the Stanley Cup. So while, we could probably say, I'll agree with you that it is the most improbable American sports story, but it is certainly not at the same level of Leicester City, who I believe that season had just earned promotion to the EPL, did not have any big-name guys. I would still argue that Marc-Andre Fleury, in of itself, he is a better player or a more established player than like even a Jamie Vardy was at the time for Leicester. So Vardy had kind of... The Leicester City comparison is actually interesting because a guy like Vardy was bounced around a lot in different levels of English soccer. I think he'd gone all the way down to the third league and then kind of clawed his way back up and ended up leading that improbable run. But, there are some parallels to those two teams, but 5,000-1 odds versus 500-1 odds, I think it's pretty clear. But that's just me.
Can I explain to you why there's a difference?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay. What is the most gambled on sport in the world?
Soccer.
Okay. So when you have it's more likely when you have more money being gambled on a sport that the odds are going to be longer for a team like that because all the big money is going on the favorites, right? When you have a sport that is not gambled on a lot, like hockey, which is probably, I would probably put hockey behind like auto racing. I mean, in all honesty, as far as gambling, I mean, I would say soccer, football, basketball, horse racing, baseball, auto racing, probably boxing and MMA are probably ahead of hockey as well. I mean, in all honesty, hockey is so far down the sports betting list that you can't have such incredibly long odds because the odds makers aren't going to make anything off of the other teams that are losing. You know what I'm saying? Like, they look at it and say, okay, well, even if this hits, how much will we, make on these other teams? And so, all right, geez, Leicester City's 5,000 to 1. Well, of course, if that happens, but we're going to make so much money on the other EPL teams not winning that even if somebody has that and wins that bet, it's not going to kill us. Whereas in hockey, where nobody bets hockey except for my degenerate friend who texts me every day looking for bets in the playoffs. Like, you can't have it be that high. You just can't.
All right.
So I mean, that's the reason that's the difference between 500 and 5,000. But on top of the fact is this: Leicester City existed prior to the year that they won. They existed.
Yeah, but they were a minor league club, Anthony. I mean, realistically, they were in the English Championship. Like, they did not have like any real big name or big money players on the team at the time.
But
I know what you're like.
But
I know
they
what you're
existed.
Saying. Yeah, but the Golden Knights were cobbled together with guys that were playing at the NHL level. I mean, they might not have been the best.
Who
nobody wanted. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury was still a very good goalie. Matt Murray had played his way into that starting role.
Right.
Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, like I get it. Like, we didn't necessarily want him. There were other guys that team ended up getting.
Look who's carrying them right now offensively. Jonathan Marchessault, who's been on 5 teams, never could stick anywhere. Nobody thought he was any good. He was just a guy. He was undrafted, whatever. And now he's like leading the team in goals in the playoffs. I mean, this is a remarkable underdog story.
Oh, it is.
Beyond
I'm
anything
not
I've
trying
ever
to
seen.
minimalize it because I'm obviously going to root for Vegas. Like, I think it's an amazing story for the sport. Since we brought up betting, and Kyle and I have been talking a lot about sports betting on Crossing Broadcast, I wanted to kind of get your thoughts. So, I think that it's fair to say that sports that are slower, like baseball, are probably going to benefit by small prop bets and everything, and live betting. I think that actually gives a chance of bringing baseball back. I said not from the brink of death, but I think that baseball, because just by virtue of the fact that their average viewer or average consumer of the sport are so much older than NHL fans, even NFL fans, certainly MLS or international soccer fans, that this maybe kind of opens the door again to have 20-somethings find a reason to watch baseball that maybe right now have kind of become disaffected by consuming it. Do you think that hockey is going to potentially benefit or could benefit the NHL, in terms of ratings or whatever, could benefit from the legalization or at least the deregulation or whatever of sports gambling in the U.S.?
Every sport benefits in some capacity from this. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's a boon for every sport to have legalized gambling and to have legalized sports books for people to bet, because degenerates will bet on anything. I'm serious. I mean, they will find anything to bet on, and any wager that you offer, somebody will bet it. So it will have a direct benefit because if someone's got money on the line, they're going to watch it. Mm-hmm. So it's going to improve every sport to have this legalized. So yes, but do I think it's going to have a major impact on the NHL? No, because I think it's too difficult of a sport to really gamble on. I mean, you see it there's no home ice advantage in the playoffs. I mean, there's no real way to look at it other than you can't gamble on hockey unless you have a feel for what's happening with the team. And I'm down there. I know players. I talk to players. I talk to coaches and managers. And I literally, I tell you, I have a guy who texts me every day for hockey bets, literally every day. And I do pretty well come playoff time for him, because I think I have a feel for how the teams are going in the playoffs. in the regular season, I tell him, I said, me giving you a response here in the regular season is no different than you doing it yourself because it's so 50-50. It's so up in the air. So many games in hockey are you just don't know. It's like throwing something against the wall and hoping it sticks. You just don't know with hockey. And so I don't see how it makes a huge difference during the course of a season. It's going to help a little bit, but not. I don't see it having the same kind of effect it has on football and baseball and basketball. I mean, he texts me sometimes and gives me the odds after the first period, and I'm like, dude, seriously? Like, I mean, this is insane. So I don't think it changes much because there's only so much scoring in hockey. Like, you can't. Like, the over-under is 5.5, right? I mean, is that going to change much from period to period? I don't know. I mean, how much is it going to change? So, like, there are so many things that you can toy around with in baseball and football, and the props can really get really kind of fun and interesting and quirky. I don't see how it happens in hockey. I don't see what you can do to make it any different. And so, therefore, I think it has a small benefit to the league, but not a huge benefit.
All right, so as we kind of wrap up here, we've got the Stanley Cup Finals are probably, in the next, probably starting in 2 weeks or so?
No, less than, I mean, it could be less than that. I mean,
Well, I'm looking at the schedule right now. So Game 5 of Golden Knights and Jets happens on the 20th. Game 5 of Caps Lightning is tonight, the 19th. The latest that these series could end, theoretically, or probably if the Eastern Conference Final goes to a seventh game, that's the 23rd, and Vegas and Winnipeg, if somehow Winnipeg's able to extend the series to a seventh game, which it doesn't look like they will, that would be May 24th. Last year's finals started on the 29th. So let's say it's in the next week and a half. If we don't get an episode in before then, I think we will, but if we don't, how do you see this thing playing out? Vegas has a 3-1 lead. Game 5 is in Winnipeg, and Caps Lightning, Game 5 is in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, so let's start out west. I mean, I think Winnipeg can win Game 5. I don't think they can beat Vegas 3 in a row. I don't think there's any way they win Game 6 back in Vegas. Vegas has already proven that they can win in Winnipeg, which is a tough place to win, and they won in Game 2 there. I think that they're going to win. They're the story, and it's going to happen. They're going to get to the final. As for the East, Washington had their chance to bury Tampa. They were up 2-0 going home. All they really had to do was win one of the two games on home ice. Lost them both. Now they got to win 2 out of 3, and 2 of them are in Tampa. It's just not going to happen. Tampa's figured it out. I think Tampa wins this series. As a matter of fact, I think Tampa wins it in 6. I don't even think it goes 7. I think Tampa wins the next 2, and it's over. So I think it's Tampa and Vegas in the final. And
don't predict it yet. We don't need to. Don't go into a finals prediction. I just wanted to know who you think is going to go through.
Yeah, Tampa and Vegas. I mean, if to be honest with you, if I had to pick that prior to the start of the round, I would have gone with Tampa and Vegas as well. I didn't think Vegas would have as easy a time with Winnipeg as they've had, and I thought Tampa would have an easier time with Washington than they're having. But I would have probably said Tampa in 5 and Vegas in 7 is what I would have probably said going in. Now I don't think either one reaches Game 7.
Okay. I'm trying to think. The other thing that I wanted to get to was if Washington ends up kind of blowing this and they get knocked out after exercising some demons and getting as far as they did and knocking out Pittsburgh, does this hurt Alex Ovechkin's legacy? Does it do anything to change it? Because it felt like momentum had kind of shifted. It seemed like he was maybe poised to potentially lead Washington to a Stanley Cup final and maybe even win it. For a guy that was, I don't think there was ever really a question of whether or not Sidney Crosby would be taken number 1 overall in that draft. There were people, I would kind of compare it to the Ben Simmons and Brandon Ingram draft, where it felt like you had scorer versus overall player.
Well, you got to remember
this is kind of tricky, right? Like, legacy-wise, Ovechkin's,
Ovechkin was drafted the year before him, before Crosby. Was he? Yes, but he just didn't. It was the year of the lockout, so he didn't play. They were rookies in the same year.
That was it. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but Ovechkin was actually drafted the year before Crosby, number 1 overall. So it's hard to sit there and say that it tarnishes his legacy. I mean, the guy's got 20 points He's 1 point behind. There's 4 guys who have 21 points so far in the playoffs. Kuznetsov and Wheeler are still playing. Gensel and Crosby are done. So all Ovechkin really need. I mean, he's behind his teammate by 1 point, and Blake Wheeler by 1 point. Wheeler's going to be done pretty soon too. So, like, Ovechkin's got 10 goals, 10 assists in this playoff. I mean, that's pretty darn good. I mean, he's averaging over a point a game. It's hard to sit there and say if they blow this that it tarnishes his personal legacy. I mean, yeah, I mean, you could have blamed him for seasons in the past where he didn't play great in the playoffs and they got bounced by Pittsburgh when they should have been the better team. But this year, I think that he's playing free and loose because the expectations weren't there. Like, nobody looked at the Capitals, even though they won the Metropolitan Division, and said, oh, this is a team that's going to go to the Stanley Cup Final. I mean, none of us saw it. Yeah. Because nobody thought they were as good as Pittsburgh. Nobody thought they were as good as any of the teams in the Atlantic. You know, whether they matched up against Tampa or Boston or Toronto, nobody thought Washington was as good as any of them. So they were really kind of an afterthought in the Eastern Conference. And so when they got out to the 2-0 lead in this series, and all of a sudden it's like the odds changed. As a matter of fact, I got an email update that the odds had changed after they went up 2-0. They became the favorite to win the Stanley Cup.
Man,
and then once again, as soon as it got to that point, that's when all of a sudden you can feel that like sphincter tightening happening, right? Right.
That's the sound. Oh God, that's the sound.
Yeah.
Oh. I thought we were gonna go with like the air leaving, and I'm like, why does it sound like a slurp? What is? Oh God.
I don't know. It was just.
Oh,
that's
off
the
awful.
top. It was off the top of the head.
All right, well,
anyway,
I think if that's the sound of your sphincter tightening, you need to go see a proctologist, right? Like that. A colonoscopy might be in your very near future. That's not good, Anthony. You might need to get that looked at.
Oh man, but anyway, so I mean but I can't really blame him. I mean, he's had a really nice playoff run. Even if he doesn't get another point and they lose the next 2 games and he finishes with 20 points in 18 games, that's pretty darn good. It's kind of hard to say that this tarnishes his legacy because they blew a 2-0 lead in the conference finals.
All right. Well, I think that's a pretty good place to jump off for this week. We're going to have some pretty interesting episodes coming up in the next couple of weeks. We are in talks with a couple guests or a few guests, depending on how you want to look at it. So those should be some pretty exciting episodes. The number one thing here is Snow the Goalie is certainly not taking time off for the off season. We've got the draft coming up, still have this Phantoms run for however long, and we'll have some guests on, and it'll be a nice off season, and come here for your informed and somewhat rational takes, and we'll be back with some guests, and life will be good. Don't forget to go on to iTunes and leave a 5-star review. I think right now we're sitting at 22 5-star reviews in iTunes, so whether you get this on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or wherever, try to get to a device that has iTunes. Leave a 5-star review. The rating is nice, but the review is something that we can read on the show. Is there anything else that you wanted to put out to the people there, Anthony?
No, I'm excited to go watch soccer.
All right. That's right. Hey, enjoy the Union game. I bet they're going to win. I'm just kidding. They probably won't. I don't know. I'll text you closer to the game, and I'll give you an honest opinion of it.
So here's what I got to do. I got to tell you that this is something I didn't mention with Bob on the Phillies podcast, but I'll tell you because I know you're a soccer guy, and it'll be funnier for you. So in order to set this whole thing up, I'm doing this for my bosses down in D.C. who are coming up for the game, and in order to get them like a special thing, like I'm bringing them onto the field. Ooh. Before the game for warm-ups and stuff like that. Okay. I went rolling out the red carpet. But in order to make all this work, I kind of agreed to write an experience story for Crossing Broad on what it's going to be like for a non-soccer fan to go to a Union game.
Oh boy! All right, well,
I got to come up with something. I got to come up with something.
Go to the Sons of Ben tailgate. The Sons of Ben tailgates are awesome. They are nice. They're like $20. It's all you can drink. They usually have Dogfish Head beer, and they have burgers and dogs, and that's a good way to spend your money. Yeah, and they've got the check out the rooftop deck. I think it used to at least be a Dogfish Head thing. I think one year it was Land Shark, but they've got the rooftop bar that kind of overlooks the parking lot and the wharf building. So Yeah, they have a nice little concourse that's outside. I mean, it's raining, so that's not going to be as fun, but it's a nice stadium, and every seat's a good seat. So,
well, I've been to the stadium. I covered NCAA lacrosse championships there, so I know what the stadium's like. So yes, it's a great stadium. I've not been there for soccer though. I've not been to a Union game, believe it or not.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. So speaking of soccer, don't forget, if you're listening to this, Snow the Goalie is part of the Crossing Broad Podcast Network with shows such as Crossing Broadcast, which is every Monday, Wednesday, and sometimes Friday. Crossed Up, a Phillies podcast with Anthony and Bob. Obviously, this show, Snow the Goalie, which we appreciate you listening to. Crossing Broad FC with me and Phil Kydell. And It's Always Soccer in Philadelphia with Kevin Kincaid and Dave Zeitlin. So, don't forget to go check out those shows, add them to your subscription list, and leave 5-star reviews and ratings and all that. And for Anthony, I'm Russ. We'll talk to you again next week, possibly with a guest. Keep an eye out.